I'm sorry, 1 minute. So the location concerns. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you scientific evidence so you know how much you have, how you can use it, and for how long. And then the decision is yours, it's not ours, right? We just want to give you the facts so that you can base your decisions based on the facts, thinking about the future generations, not about you only. And this is how we see food security through the lenses of water security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandros, also for underlining the importance of science. And we all know that, for example, when it comes to the IPCC report, Africa is heavily, heavily underrepresented for data. So I think everyone here is aware that we need better data to make better decisions, as you said, not only for today, but also for the future. And I especially welcome your comment on that you are trying to provide the data, but then, you know, what happens with that, the decision is ultimately the ownership of the community. I'm sure my next speaker would underline the importance of science and data. It's Dr. Robert Kiburi from the University of Nairobi. He's a researcher on food security and climate-smart agriculture. And I would like to know from your extensive research on the topic, but probably also from a policy point, yeah? How can we achieve a better and more nutritious food supply in Africa? From a policy perspective, what are your suggestions to all the policymakers who are here and listening to you?
Well, thank you very much, Anya, and thank you very much, Honorable Kajwang, and everyone present. As a Kenyan, it's obviously a pleasure to speak from the chamber. Most of the time you come to the gallery, so of course it's really good. I come from the University of Nairobi, the Faculty of Law. Yes, indeed, there are significant questions when it comes to nutritious and adequate supply of food. And from a policy perspective, first of all, is that policy often responds to diagnostic from science or from society on what is needed. And secondly, that policy then needs to be coherent. A major pitfall is when we make a policy to address one problem, but it's not holistic, and it ends up causing deleterious effects on another area. And I'd like to demonstrate using 3 examples. From the supply side of food, you know, for instance, at farm level and production side, from the production side of food, in recent years and in this week specifically, we're very concerned about climate impacts on agriculture. But I would argue that there are 2 senses. There is vulnerability in agriculture within the African continent, but this vulnerability appears in 2 senses, such that there is vulnerability inside of vulnerability. There are inherent vulnerabilities that producers, farmers face in agriculture, and these vulnerabilities make them even more susceptible to climate impacts, so that they are vulnerable 2 times over. And I can give examples. One, of course, for instance, is historically we have encouraged farmers to use certain types of fertilizers like DAP that have resulted in soil acidification, which means that their soil is less fertile and more susceptible to climate impacts. We have encouraged forms of land management and husbandry that have resulted in loss of soil organic matter, which means that we have to use more fertilizers today. We continue to encounter high levels of post-harvest losses. And this is clear now as we head to the El Nino rainfall that is coming right at the time when farmers are expecting a bumper harvest. So my point is, this is the point I'm making about coherent policies. We need to address these vulnerabilities and deficiencies that are inherent to agriculture policies that will then make us more capable and more resilient to the climate impacts, the droughts, changing rainfall patterns that we can't really do much about. The drought will continue coming. The dry days inside the March, April, May rainfall season will continue increasing, but how do we deal with the core problems that make it possible for our farmers to do this? And this means that those responsible for agriculture policy need to understand more how the deficiencies we've seen over the years, including consequences of policies that we've had, are making it worse off for us to survive. We continue, for instance, to encourage irrigation, but how well are we doing in terms of protecting catchments, and as he was saying, the speaker before me, to deal with the overuse of groundwater today, etc. The second point relates to a problem that is again showing the incoherence. Yes, this country continues to experience significant land subdivision, and this is not limited to Kenya. And this subdivision is happening in a rather uncontrolled way, taking on productive areas of agriculture, and is now moving to rangelands where there is a lot of pastoralism with sizes diminishing, and land subdivision taking away critical assets that pastoralists rely on, like watering areas, holding grounds, movement corridors, etc. So if we don't deal with land subdivision, again, at the production level, we are going to see families continuing, households engaging in farming, but are unable to even meet the food requirements for their domestic use, leave alone to bring to market to support the broader elements of livelihoods. And this is very, very critical. And now once if we are able to address some of these and now worry a lot about the climate impacts, and these have been spoken at length today, so I wouldn't really want to delve into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert Kibubi, also for keeping the time, and thank you for reminding us that it's really a holistic approach that is needed, and that, you know, if you just look at one aspect, there's the risk that you create a lot of problems on other aspects that are related. So thank you for bringing this up. I would like to give now the floor to David Gikaria. He's the Chair, Committee Environment in the National Assembly. And as has been mentioned various times over the summit, Kenya was one of the first country that passed the Climate Change Act in 2016, which has recently been amended in 2023. And we would like to, or I would like to understand how this new climate change amendment will actually contribute to the ambitious green growth objectives that Kenya has set herself.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, it is true, after we passed the legislation in 2016, that's, I think, the 12th Parliament, and this climate change is something that evolves every day. So through the years, we have come across the changes that needed to be done, and that necessitated the amendments that we did. And these amendments that we did, of course, we had to get in touch with so many other stakeholders who we take their views and opinion on how best we can be able to address this issue of climate change. But going back to your question, is that the focus of afforestation, reforestation, and the nature-based solution as a basis of earning credits will help in the contribution to the achievement of the Kenya Green Growth objective. And what we mean is to say that the mechanism that have been put in place through the Act now, because it has been accented by the President, we have the involvement of the public. We realize the importance of the private sector for them to be able, if you look at the Act when we were doing the amendments, we have increased the number of stakeholders in there's a committee that was informed in that, and we increased the number of the private sector. And we realized that the private sector plays a huge role on matters of climate change. And that aspect itself of bringing in the public and the private entities to transact in the emissions by either emissions of carbon into the atmosphere is a key component that will go to address the green growth. And not forgetting that the government, through bilateral and multilateral agreements, will also play a huge role in trying to address some of this, to try and bring the aspect of what we are trying to address, and particularly, as you have indicated in the question, on how we can be able to, it will help in the green growth of these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bikaria, and I really want to congratulate on this inclusive approach that you have taken, involving all the stakeholders, trying to make it as broad as possible, the importance of nature-based solutions, obviously, but also trying to really involve the private sector and see how money on climate finance can be generated inside the country. And I think this is really revolutionary for Africa, and I'm sure, as in 2016 with the Climate Change Act, a lot of countries will now follow and see how they can integrate elements like the carbon credits into their legislation. And this is actually, again, a very good bridge to my next speakers, who are actually from the private sector. And I would like to ask Dr. Greg Awanda. He's a veterinarian and an entrepreneur in the livestock sector. So Dr. Awanda, your business aims to add value and diversification to the food sector. From your perspective as an entrepreneur, could you just let us know which policies would be helpful to support your business and enable it to grow? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya, and for this opportunity. Now, in Kenya, we have 77% of our population living in rural areas, and we rely so much on agriculture, so much that it contributes 30% of our GDP. Now, only 21% of Kenya's land is arable. And with this 21%, there's diminishing returns as in terms of harvest, as Dr. Kibugi has mentioned. What's happening is that we've done so much livestock production and crop production in these farms until they're not giving us returns anymore. So with a change of strategy, we have to started embracing technology for production. Specifically in the livestock industry, we are using assisted reproductive techniques to give farmers more returns from their livestock. The problem we're having is that the cost of production using these assisted reproductive techniques is so high, one of them being embryo transfer. Now, in the country, we've had investors putting in money into 4 embryo transfer laboratories to make farmers get high genetic livestock, which can give them higher production figures compared to what we've been keeping. But then all of them have closed down because of the cost of input. Now, our policies that we'd like to be passed is that how do we make inputs for these assisted reproductive technologies are more affordable to farmers. Now, the little land that we have, 21% of our country being arable, how much of it can we increase? The other 79%. Again, irrigation is a bit of more expensive to most farmers in the country. And for our livestock to give us better productivity, we also relying on crop production. The 21% arable land cannot feed both the humans and the livestock we have in the country. So we're having farmers who cannot afford to irrigate the land, and they have animals which cannot give them the returns that they're expecting from it, both for their own sustainability, subsistence use, and for the market. So what we are dealing with is, if we can get policies whereby probably get incentives for farmers who are in terms of tax cuts or for inputs to be used in these production systems. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Awanda, and also for highlighting, that financial incentives are necessary, in fact, in order to create a sustainable business that is economically viable. I'm sure we will have a discussion on this later on. And since you have been all very good with time, I'm very positive that there will be some time for Q&A. But I would also like to ask or invite Mr. Mokaya also to the discussion. He's the founder of Rema Agritech, so also an agribusiness. And Mr. Mokaya, we have already talked about policies could you just let us know which role green technology actually plays in your business, and how the access to new technologies could be improved? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anja, for just inviting me. I first of all appreciate being part of this discussion, which is very important, not only in Kenya, but in the whole of Africa. So I am representing, let me say, MSMEs right now. And these are the people who contribute up to 40% of the country's GDP. That's an estimation. So I hope what I'm going to say will really help the parliamentarians in Kenya and, of course, all over Africa to actually help us develop green technology. Now, Anya, just as you have said, we are really in an era of developing green technologies. And when I say technologies, I don't mean only digital technologies. There are innovations which have a local backup, which I actually, one of them is one thing that I'm doing at Rema Agritech. I'm just promoting a small, local innovative technology of vertical farming to the women down there to help them produce vegetables and, of course, African leafy vegetables locally and, of course, organically. Now, what this has done to my business, number one, we have seen that adoption of green technology has reduced cost over time, because as we produce these African leafy vegetables, we are able to also solar dry them using the solar dryer technology, which has, of course, the initial setup is not as cheap as we may think, but over time, green technologies actually reduce the cost of doing business, especially in Kenya. And then number two, another thing that this does is that it's funny that as we are having this discussion about green technology, what we should do in climate financing or climate action, most of the innovations that come up are really exciting. They are exciting, yes, but they're also helping us. So in the long run, these technologies are able to help us actually do have an area where we do things sustainably, and of course we reduce the cost. Now, what I would suggest as the parliamentarians should do, I really request that we put more funding, policies on funding on research and development of green technologies. I was reading a report that was produced last month from UNEP that we have a funding gap of $200 billion in climate finance. I mean, that is a great opportunity for innovators to come up and, of course, invest in this. So policies, the framework that should be put on research and development, that should be it. One last thing, again, Anja, is that we need government to give these businesses incentives, tax incentives. I mean, people cannot come up with innovations and then be taxed so much. I mean, it's good to give them incentives. It's good to give us incentives so that at least as we do this, as we adopt these green technologies, we are able to be encouraged that the government at least is looking at us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mokaya. And just to underline, when we talk about this homegrown, innovative ideas and capital for research, we very often don't talk about big numbers. Sometimes it's just really, a small grant that is needed to develop the project idea. We're talking about money now, so I would like to come to my last speaker. It's Mr. Keegan Shelimo. He's a principal at Open Capital. Open Capital is a financial institution, and you actually support or give advice to agribusinesses, how they could improve their value chain, and in this function offer financial advice. So from your experience and your work with agribusinesses, what are the challenges that those enterprises are facing in Africa currently, and how would you think that these challenges could be addressed? given, of course, the very narrow fiscal space that there is in a lot of countries.
Yep. No, thank you so much, Anya, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking. Honorable members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, really appreciate this time that we're having to discuss some of the key pieces in the discussion around climate and how it touches on agriculture and also on the finance side. I bring that perspective as I represent Open Capital. As Anya said, we're a management consulting and financial advisory firm. We work across the continent, really bringing solutions at the market, insights and policy level, working with green business and innovation, and also unlocking climate finance. And so able to bring a very broad perspective into the discussion. I also bring a Kenyan and a Pan-African perspective, so very excited to be sharing this. And you asked the first question on what are the challenges, and we talk about them on 4 sort of broad levels. It's 1 at the project level, 2nd is at the finance level, 3rd is at the skills and sort of technical capability, and then finally we talk about it at the governance level, sort of what kind of policies we have in place. When we dig deeper into the finance side, what are the issues that are at play? The first and most critical is really a lack of access to early stage capital. Many of the project developers just don't have the money and no one's lending it to them. If you look at financial institutions, there are very few who are willing to take that early risk. That's 1. 2, in addition to the absence of that money, it doesn't stay that long. So long-term capital is also not available. 3rd is really our financial systems are not developed enough to deploy a lot of these climate finance instruments. I'll give a slight joke on this because we've just passed the carbon trading bill, and sort of now it's an act signed by the president, and a discussion with a financial institution recently, this past week, and the discussion was on, okay, we have carbon credits as part of our revenue in the business. That was one of our clients, and the key question was, how does the bank think about that? We now need to talk about what are the solutions. And if there's one thing to take away from this discussion, the core action at the policy and action level is, how can we reduce the risk for finance? That is the core goal. What that means is emphasizing things like economic viability within the policies that we're thinking about. So how does this make sense at the project developer level? 2nd is consistency, transparency in the policy that relates to climate smart agriculture. And then finally, really thinking about tax incentives and even subsidies for activities that touch on climate smart agriculture. There are many more, but I will pause there for this and happy to discuss further.
Thank you very much, Keegan. And we do have some time for Q&A now. Honorable Chair, how much time should I allow?
Well, maybe 2 with 2 minutes per question.
Okay, 2 minutes per question. And we had some questions from the previous session, so if those speakers would like to make a comment, I will give them the floor first. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have a second round. So, and kindly just introduce yourself quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Commander Mwafrika, Member of Parliament for Isambu constituency here in Kenya. We have agreed as Africans that our continent has become vulnerable to climate change. We have a critical question to ask ourselves, we as Africans. Which role are we ready to take to combat and counter climate change? Because we must be actively participants of this endeavor of combating and countering climate change. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Honorable. Sorry, who was the gentleman over there, and when we take the 2 ladies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to welcome our guests from the various countries in this Parliament of ours. My name is Omar Mwinyi, member for Changamwe constituency in Mombasa. I have a question and suggestion at the same time. The object of this meeting today is to ensure that every member country is carried along in this process of countering climate change adverse effects. I wonder, Mr. Chairman, after this session, after this meeting, don't we have other avenues where we can continue with this discussion so that at least we can implement the changes that we think are necessary? For example, we may be passing laws in a record maybe 3 days, but then how about implementing those laws? Our speaker, Mr. Chairman, was telling us here, you find somebody throwing banana, in the streets, all right? And then others, polluting our rivers. Why don't we have actionable laws that, of course, can be implemented for the benefit of Africa? Finally, Mr. Chairman, we have accountability lacking also. And of course, corruption is also a menace in this continent of ours. The moment we address this also, Mr. Chairman, then the better for our legislation and all these things. Otherwise, for those few remarks, Mr. Chairman, I would like to encourage every member who is present here to establish a communication, and perhaps I would love, Mr. Chairman, for you to organize a Kenyan chapter.
Thank you very much, Honorable, also for bringing up the aspect of impact and outcome, of course. And I do understand that this is just hopefully the first of a series of meetings, and the aspect of accountability will be addressed, I understand, also in the outcome statements, and some of the members of the African Parliamentary Network for Climate Change are very much dedicated to take very strong steps on accountability and making sure that legislation is implemented as it is. But thank you again for stressing this point. We have 2 female speakers now. You want to go first? Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Anita Soina from the African Youth Climate Assembly. And just to notice that I ran for office in the previous election for the position of Member of Parliament. And even though I did not make it, then I think I'm here today. And I feel so honored to be speaking in the chambers. My concern is on the presence that, looking at the Africa Climate Summit, we have about 20 head of states. For the African Youth Climate Assembly, we were able to bring over youths from over 45 countries. But looking at these chambers today, we have very few countries represented. And mine goes to the climate change committees in various countries. What are you doing to also capacity build the other members of parliament? Because we've seen scenarios where some members of parliament cannot even be able to talk about climate change and even address what climate change is, while these are the issues that affect their constituents. And also because you have mentioned that your role is very key in addressing climate action. We are talking about finance right now at the Africa Climate Summit, and we depend on you to check on, to put the governments and to hold the governments to accountable. So that is my concern for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Edith Nens, a member of Parliament, Kitui West. Kitui West is in the eastern part of Kenya. And my concern is on the way we plan land, especially for the land, especially in the African countries. And this is on agribusiness, because most of our African countries, you find that the land is not planned or set aside for large-scale farming. It's not set aside for settlement, human settlement. But you find that in the developed countries, they have set land aside for farming and for settlement, and therefore, when there's large-scale farming, it means that there will be more control, there will be structured way of farming, there will be, actually, if it's use of technology to be controlled, use of water, use of pesticides, and without that kind of control, you find that it's difficult to actualize the climate change which we are talking about. So is there any time in the future when we think that we can really have controlled use of land? That is my concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will probably give the panel a few minutes to reply on the questions. I mean, most of them were interventions, but nevertheless, especially when it comes to land use. And then we will have another round of questions, and I have been leaning very heavily towards the Kenyan participants, so allow me that in the second round I will accept only non-Kenyan interventions. Thank you. Anyone from the panel, maybe Robert on the land use aspect?
Well, thank you very much. I think as I was saying at the beginning when I gave my remarks is that we have to be very careful about land use. If we go about it in a business as usual approach as we've done over the past, we will get to a point where it's going to be very expensive to try to reverse, and there will be a lot of suffering around it. Arid and semi-arid lands are already vulnerable with soils that are weak in terms of formation and fertility, and in terms of heat, and in terms of scarcity of water. And so intensification or subdivisions or changes in use need to be accompanied by commensurate investments in those areas of weaknesses. For example, dry land forestry, and dry land forestry that is done in a meaningful way, for instance, and in moving away now to highland areas, more crop intensive areas. We're already seeing counties in this country where most of the agricultural land is subdivided to the point that it's no longer capable of any significant or meaningful agricultural production. Land consolidation is a very expensive and politically contentious exercise. If we have to get there, and if we're not careful, we will get there. It will be a very difficult political agenda to move. Thank you.
Thank you, but if I can just echo some of the words from this morning, parliamentarians have been calling for a bold discussion and not sugarcoating, so I think this is really the moment in which we should have this conversations, even though they might be controversial. As I said, I would like to give the opportunity now to the non-Kenyan guests.
I wanted to just answer about the capacity to the future Member of Parliament who's just spoken, and she said that she was unable to, but hopefully she needs to put more effort and she'll be here. And once she's here, she will also learn from our standing orders for us to pass any bill for that purpose of approval. We only need 50 members of Parliament to be seated and voting. And once we have 50, so it means, and we are 350. So it means 300 are not here. So what we have agreed to do through the Speaker is that in every forum, we have our website where we encourage members of Parliament to go through the website and see what has been approved. You don't have to be physically here, but if you go through the website, you will find what was approved. You can be able now to read and be able to, and one of the functions of a Member of Parliament is representation. So whatever you get out of this, any forum that you get out there to the public, then you're able now to pass that message and to disseminate that information that is required. Secondly, in the latest, we have been adding some money through the CDF. It's a kitty for constituency. Some monies have been set aside for purposes of environmental awareness. Actually, every constituency will be receiving around 4 million shillings. And I think that is an opportunity for members of Parliament to be able to take the climate change and environmental issues back to their constituencies and purposes of disseminating the same information that is required. Thank you.
We had a question from Nigeria. Honorable Solomon, and then followed by Uganda. And is it Guinea? Is that correct? Okay, so Nigeria, Uganda, and Guinea.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, my very distinguished colleagues. Honorable Solomon Maren is my name, and I am from Nigeria. And I think it's a very serious privilege to be here and to stand on this very hallowed chamber to speak on the very topical issue like the green growth that we are talking about. I listened to two of the panelists. One was talking about rainwater conservation and the use of surface water, and the other was talking about the issues of vulnerability within vulnerability of farmers. And Nigeria happens to be one of the countries that is suffering from all of this, considering the fact that in northern part of Nigeria, our major source of even groundwater recharge used to be the Lake Chad. The Lake Chad used to conserve water and recharge even the groundwater in northern Nigeria. And at that time, when it was full, you could drill a borehole at 30 meters in the north and get water. Today, you cannot drill a borehole less than 170 meters to be able to access clean groundwater for drinking. So it's a very serious challenge. And the Lake Chad also used to be one of the major source of surface water for fishing and also agriculture, planting, dry season, and so many other systems of farming. Thank you, sorry. We have lost close to about 70% of the Lake Chad, and for that reason, a lot of activities around the Lake Chad have also been lost. And so farmers are in a very deep situation, and that has also aggravated the insecurity situations in our country. And I want us to look at in the middle, central Nigeria, we have huge production, but the major problem that farmers have is that they do not have technologies to preserve some of these goods that they produce. Like in tomato farming alone, over 60% of the tomatoes produced in central Nigeria is thrown out to the west, refuse bins, because you carry it and you cannot use it, and because the weather is hot, you lose everything. And so there are no preservative means at all for it. I want to ask the panelists, looking at this scenario, with the Nigerian population at independence of about 45 million, and today 223 million. If you look at the growth rate, which is, yes, geometric in nature, but it's about 2.7 million people per year, are given birth to in Nigeria. And that is a very huge concern. And that also led to the overusage of even some of the surface waters that we have. And by so doing, even the rainwater conservation is not even sufficient again to sustain that kind of population. What do you think as a country we should do in order to mitigate some of these challenges in looking at what we are looking at today? And I want to also ask whether regenerative agriculture is a solution to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Also for bringing in another aspect yet, which is the nexus between climate change and climate-induced security issues, where climate change really becomes a threat multiplier, which would be enough to cover at a separate meeting. But the question to the panelists was very clear. So I'm taking two more questions, and then we have a couple of minutes for everyone to reply. We have Honorable Lumu from Uganda, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. My name is Richard Lumu, Member of Parliament from Uganda, representing Mityana South. I have a straight question to the Honourable Member from Malawi over cutting taxes on gas usage. And I don't know whether every Malawian now has a gas cooker or anything, because My proposition was that as Member of Parliament, if we need to reduce cutting trees, we should use gas. And I was suggesting that Parliament should now appropriate funds to buy, distribute, but again, the people who get the cookers pay back after time so that they can reduce on cutting of trees. By that I mean the gas we can reduce the taxes on gas, but again, you cannot reduce the taxes on gas without providing the instruments where gas is required to be used. Secondly is the food security issue and water. Water bodies in East Africa, like Lake Victoria, for example, is highly contaminated as we are talking. Most of the sewage is directed into the lake by hotel owners, by homes near the lakes, and so on and so forth. And that contaminates the water. Drinking that water becomes also a problem. I suggest that now as MPs we should legislate on how to protect water bodies so that drinking that water is not dangerous.
Thank you very much. And then we had the honorable member from Guinea.
Merci. Là, moi, je parle en français. Je suis venu d'un pays francophone. Je souhaiterais avoir quelqu'un pour interpréter mon allocution.
Do we have interpreter services? Is that possible? Okay, thank you. Oui, je crois que ça doit être possible.
Okay.
Attendez.
Ok, merci. Merci et vraiment je salue cette assemblée qui est une première qu'on se retrouve en tant que parlementaire pour discuter des problèmes de climat. Mais avant d'entamer mon propos, je voudrais attirer votre attention sur l'organisation. Parce que l'Afrique, c'est francophone, c'est anglophone, c'est lusophone, c'est arabophone. On ne peut pas venir dans une salle où on ne parle spécifiquement C'est bon, je peux aller?
S'il vous plaît, excusez-moi, il y a ici la prestation pour les personnes qui parlent français. Donc, c'était suggéré que vous allez ici et prendre le devis de traduction. Comme ça, les autres membres peuvent aussi entendre votre allocation en anglais.
Ok.
Merci. Merci pour votre patience.
C'est bon, je peux aller? Ok, merci beaucoup. Comme je le
to give francophone This is a very important meeting, and it would be interesting and important for every participant to be able to discuss and engage. So we believe that it's extremely important to help us participate in this discussion. So Africa, today, we are here to share our experiences. We have attended several meetings across the world, the Inter-Parliamentary Union meetings on climate change. There are meetings, but each time we meet, there are speeches, and then we part ways. But this time around, this is the first time in Kenya we are meeting as parliamentarians. It is extremely important for Africa this time around to adopt a resolution and have a shared vision. We should not come out of here. We need to have a vision that will center around fund raising. What are the kind of funds that we need? Is it credit? Are we taking loans? Are we getting these loans because we are victims of climate change? Because we do not need to continue getting loans, and yet Africa is heavily indebted. We are emitting only 4%. We only have a share of 4% of the emission, and yet we are getting the impact at 80%. So the funds that we are supposed to get should be a compensation for what we are having as adverse impact. I came here to share experience with other countries from Africa. In our country, there are many things that are being launched. There are many initiatives. We are adopting laws in our parliament that take into account several components of climate. We also have other laws that we have initiated in farming and that are being ratified at our parliament. All the laws are supporting in climate action. There are so many things that we have done in Guinea. We have also ratified several international conventions. We have attended meetings where lots of funds are being disbursed, but it's not yet effective. So what can we do as MPs to ensure that the executive branch could tap into those opportunities? This is extremely important for us, and as African, I think this kind of meetings should be multiplied in future until we achieve our goals. We should not, as Africans, start fighting each other without even getting this money. We need to get the money first, and then we use the funds based on country priorities. Today we are having floods, we are having fires. Something else, there are certain things that we can do ourselves. For instance, this fight against plastic waste. In my country, for instance, 80% of the waste is plastic waste. How can we fight against it? And then we start looking for funding from abroad. So this is what we need. There are other things that we could share as experience. I noticed that there are many countries that are also fighting against plastic waste, yet in other countries, we still having challenges to address issues related to urban environment. What I would like to, in closure, please, when you invite us, please give every delegation the opportunity to present the situation for at least 5 minutes, because when we attend such a meeting, we need to get a forum where we can express ourselves without any pressure. It is critical to give each delegation somebody who will express the situation in their country and we would share the situation of their country with the facilitator. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Merci beaucoup aussi pour raiser la voix au nom de Guinée, au nom de la francophonie. Le Honorable Chair m'a dit que s'il y a la possibilité, un peu de temps, on va vous donner la possibilité de donner une petite intervention aussi cet après-midi. Excusez-nous pour tous les problèmes techniques. On va faire tout possible, bien sûr, que le texte final soit traduit.
Oui.
Et pour la prochaine fois, on va adresser cet défi. Et voilà, c'est la première fois. Et là, la prochaine fois, je suis sûre que on peut améliorer. Merci beaucoup. We now have very little time left. There were some very concrete questions to the Honorable Joloba from Malawi on water. And I would just ask my panelists to be very brief in their answers. Thank you so much for your understanding.
Thank you so much, moderator. There was a question I will start from the honorable member from Uganda. He was asking whether in Malawi, each and every citizen now is having a gas cooker. I think the idea behind of reducing taxes on the gas cookers is to make the prices affordable so that we should increase the number of people who can manage to use gas. In so doing, we will reduce the overdependence on our natural resources. So it's not that in Malawi, each and every citizen is having a gas cooker, but our mentality as members of parliament, we were trying to come up with legislation that will allow some quarters to have a gas cooker. And in terms of water regulation, in Malawi, we do have a Water Act. In that Water Act, we formulated a water regulation authority, and their mandate, among others, is to regulate sources of water. So I think on that one, we are already covered. The honorable member from Kenya also asked the question to say, we have been meeting, and we have been talking about this climate change issue. Is there anything that we are not doing as maybe as members of parliament? Do we need a specific law to address this? I think that is why we are here in Kenya, we are here in this parliament discussing about this. For the long time, we have been discussing it, but I think African countries, we are doing it as an individual member state. And now that we are coming together to speak with one voice, we are going towards that direction where we are going to find a solution. So our solution may go on to say, whatever the pollution is happening in globally, the resources are coming from Africa. What is it that we have to do for us to reduce that? Is it by increasing the prices, or is it? We are going to find ways and means of addressing that. I think in this discussion, it is very important for members to share, best practices. And the youth from Kenyan Parliament also asked about extending the knowledge of climate change issues to other members of Parliament who might not be in the Committee of Natural Resources. I think like in the Malawi setup, apart from having a Committee on Natural Resources and Climate Change, we do also have a Malawi Conservation Parliamentary Caucus, whereby the membership is open to all members, and the members are free to join. And also, in addition to that, we do have also a policy whereby each and every member, using the Constituency Development Fund, you have to get a certain percentage from that, and you go in your constituencies and implement issues of climate. So in that particular time, if you have little knowledge, you can involve even officials in the environment sector. So I think that's what I wanted to address. Thank you.
And this is also going to be your closing remarks. So answering the question and closing remarks. Thank you.
Okay, quickly for the two elements that were discussed about water. One from the Honorable Member of Parliament from Nigeria. I understand the scarcity due to population growth, and therefore the demands not only for drinking purposes, but also for agricultural purposes. There's no one solution fitting all. You have to customize the solution according to the situation. There are cases, for example, for your coastal areas where you will need to move into desalination. Other cases where you have to do a conjunctive management of your surface and groundwater. Other cases where you have to do water treatment in order to get your water to a standard that you can drink. You can even capture water from the moisture in the air. You can capture water from the rain. And as I was saying to my colleague next to me, we have developed methodologies and technologies that we can avoid having a flood from a big, let's say, rain coming in and store it somewhere for your future use. So these are approaches and methodologies that need to be used now. You have to start using technology to your service to provide you with a solution to your problem. Because the amount of water is there, you will know it once you do the proper assessment, and you cannot increase it just like that. So customization according to the location, and then, as we call it in our profession, integrated water resource management, looking at a nexus approach though, not just for water, but also for the other sectors that you would like to service. We have an office in Abuja, but as the regional hydrologist, I would be more than happy to see the cases and support you. Then for the gentleman from Uganda who spoke about transboundary waters, right, and pollution issues. First of all, we just have to know that there is an international convention on transboundary waters and lakes. And the moment that you become members of this convention, the member states have to abide by the rules that they're setting. So other countries cannot pollute, let's say, downstream and upstream, and then the downstream countries have to suffer the consequences. The solution for water pollution, though, is at the point of the pollution, not afterwards. The moment that it goes to the lake, then it will be much more difficult to deal with it. So, as the other member of the parliament spoke earlier on from Kenya about policies, I know that in Kenya you have very good policies. So, but the idea is also the compliance to these laws. So you have to sometimes strengthen your compliance mechanisms that you have. You might have a very good law about water pollution and the polluter pays principle, but the moment that this is not actually complied by, it's null. So the other thing that you have to see is your mechanisms to actually put in practice what you have, your work practically, right? Your legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will close with two broad points, one in response to the Honorable Member Solomon from Nigeria, and then to a colleague from Guinea as well. On the point on sort of post-harvest losses and related pieces, a key part of what we need to think about is how do we bring in innovation into the discussion. The reason I highlight this is you mentioned the losses in Nigeria, tomatoes, other crops. There's a lot of innovation ongoing. One specific actor, Cold Hubs, for example, provides pay-as-you-go cold storage for tomatoes and other crops, and you pay on that basis. And the idea here is there is a place the private sector can play. The key piece in all this discussion is how do we then provide the policies that enable that innovation? That is one key part in all this. I want to member from Guinea. Merci pour ton question. I think you highlighted something on the plastics. The key thing we'll need to look at is how do you implement those policies? In Kenya, for example, we have a law against plastic bags, single-use bags. I see that we have plastic bottles here. I submit that these are the sort of things we need to change in advancing the solutions and taking action. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to respond to a member from Kitui who asked about sustainable land management practices. And I'd like to put in that whereas, as I said earlier, I'd like to give an example. In this country right now, the government is subdivided land in pastoralist communities like Maasai land, who are here that are used to grazing in nomadic pastoralism, moving the animals from one place to another. Now they'll have to be confined to small pieces of land. Now, what are we going to do about it so that this land becomes more productive? And this is whereby we have to adopt sustainable smart agriculture and land management practices. Another thing is that right now, as I speak, only 0.16% of our land is being used through irrigation. How can we increase that to make it more sustainable? And then on the animal side of agriculture, we have to adopt technology. In Brazil, for example, they have 80% of milk being produced in Brazil is produced by a stabilized crossbreed, which is not a natural animal. It's a crossbreed from two different countries, and so they crossed the world to India to bring a breed of animal and crossed it with another one from Netherlands. And so they are producing as much as the Holsteins in Europe, using a breed which they created themselves using technology. So also here we have to adopt technology in our production systems. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think the question of land subdivision keeps coming up, and I think as you urged, we need to make bold statements, and I think we need to make the point that we have to be very careful about this, and it's not for lack of laws. Kenya has got very robust laws, and many countries do have, and I think this underpins the point we're making around a lot of the suggestions that we are. Rule of law is then a key concern. We can come up with a lot of proposals, but if we don't implement them fully and with consequences, then eventually we'll be trying to re-diagnose the same problem that has been diagnosed. There was a question about water, as I conclude, and we have to worry about inefficiencies in water use as well. Even as we look at extraction of more renewable water sources, or rather more fresh water sources, we also have to worry about the inefficiencies in our current use of water, I think. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Mokaya, all on your shoulders now for the last statement, and please be very brief.
Thank you very much. Member of Parliament from Nigeria, you talked of the population being 200 million right now, compared to 45 million in 1960. In Kenya, it was 6 million in 1950, and right now it's 50 million. So one fact is that the population is really increasing, and we need to be very innovative. This comes to my point that I alluded to earlier, that we really have to incentivize this idea of innovations. I mean, this space has a lot. It has a lot for our entrepreneurs. So unless they are given incentives, then we are not going to really feed this population sustainably. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very good statement to end the session. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for your engagement in the discussion, and I hand over to the Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much. The Chair cannot give me space. Thank you very much, Anya. We are not going to waste any time in transiting to the next session. But earlier on, when you are recognizing delegations, we did not recognize the delegation from Somalia. The Somali delegation is here. I was having tea with them, and we've been with them since last week at Safari Park. The Benin delegation also was not recognized, but they are present. And the Senegalese, the delegation from Senegal. The delegation from Senegal, thank you, welcome. The Honorable Dr. Mafo, you'll be having the afternoon program, but Guinea has brought up a suggestion that we might need to build into our afternoon session to allow each country delegation to make a statement, even if it's just a 3-minute statement, so that this does not become a Kenyan conversation, but it becomes a true African conversation. So you may want to start thinking how you're going to run the afternoon to accommodate all the delegations that are here to have a statement, a brief statement, even if it's 3 minutes before we do the adoption of the Nairobi Declaration. I now want to hand over to Lawrence Songa, who is a chair from the Uganda Parliament, and Lawrence will moderate the next session.
Through you, Chair. I asked a question before we break for tea. Is that going to be answered?
Yes, because you're in the panel. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And I want to start straight away with that question asked on the issue of minerals, which we have. And if we need money, why don't we get out our minerals? I think it is right time that all the countries should be able to now develop the sustainable mining laws and guidelines that will guide the mining of minerals. It is true, from minerals we can generate a lot of money than going for high interest loans. I think that's what I can say, but it must be sustainable. Actually, this drives me to the topic we are coming for. Many countries are trying their best to see that they do sustainable mining, climate smart agriculture, even in Somalia, even in the Sahel. They want to have water security, food security, nutrition security. All these things must be done. All the things we have talked about must be done without degrading the environment. And that is what we call the green growth. We must do this without degrading the natural assets for the where our well-being depends. And then for Africa to do this, we must address a number of issues. We must use strategic approaches, strengthen capacity, and also do climate smart investment. So there are people who can elaborate on this, and I want to take this opportunity to call them straight away. On the topic of driving green growth, finance solution for Africa and the world. Earlier on, I had indicated that only 2% of the renewable energy funds reaches Africa. And this is because the people who are doing a pressure for the private sector to give their monies to Africa to invest in renewable energy, they give us low marks. It is only South Africa, Botswana, and Mauritius that bypasses the 50%. So where are we going to get the money if the people are not willing to give money to people who are praised to have weaknesses? So how do we drive climate finance solution for Africa? Should we look for our money internally? The person who is going to open this discussion is Dr. Anthony Nyong, who is the director at the African Development Bank, to share his thoughts on what driving green growth and climate finance solution for Africa and the world means. And you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually replacing Dr. Nyong. My name is Dr. Dosuma. I'm the Division Manager for Climate Change and Green Growth at the African Development Bank. Let me first thank you for, proposing this very important discussion on driving green growth and climate finance solutions for Africa. I'm saying that because you know that Africa has a great potential for green growth, and let me mention a few of them just as a reminder before I continue. First, the economic potential that the continent has. As you all know, African countries are among the world's fastest growing economies, and this economic growth needs to be sustainable. Second is our human capital, of course, with a youthful and very dynamic population with a lot of innovation. And the third potential is on our natural capital. As you know, Africa has 30% of the world's mineral resources, as you mentioned. And this is an opportunity for green growth transition. Another important area, of course, when we speak about natural capital is renewable energy potential, in particular solar, wind, geothermal, etc. Last but not least is the fact that about 70% of the future infrastructure in Africa is yet to be built. And this is an opportunity really to build future infrastructure in a sustainable and climate resilient manner. We also recognize that there are several barriers to achieving green growth in the continent. So far, the progress has been slow because of those barriers. And the first is that, the transitioning to green growth requires readiness and financing, which are not yet there. A recent green growth readiness assessment by the African Development Bank in Africa has shown that despite the progress being made in countries like Kenya, Rwanda, Morocco, etc., challenges still remain, and these include lack of a strategic alignment between green growth and climate policies and the national development plans. Also, another important barrier is on the lack of financing and limited ability to mobilize finance at scale, especially to crowd in private sector finance. Other barriers, of course, include ineffective implementation of existing green growth strategies, weak regulatory frameworks, also the perceived investment risk, and as well as the lack of bankable and ready for investment project pipelines. And this is of course called for the great role of parliamentarians in issuing bills and legislative actions that could help drive this green growth agenda. With regard to financing, somebody has already mentioned that green growth transition will require significant resources. Actually, it is estimated at about 1.3 trillion per year by 2030. And largely, most of the resources have to come from private finance to complement the already constrained public funds. But to date, private finance, for instance, for climate action in Africa has been very low. Only 14% of financial flows in Africa have come from private sector. But we know that there are many investment opportunities in the continent in several sectors, including, as I mentioned, renewable energy, electric vehicles, energy efficient buildings, climate resilient infrastructure, irrigation schemes, water infrastructure, of course, adaptation investments as well. But to unlock this $1 trillion market opportunity for private sector, we need appropriate regulatory, policy, legislative, and institutional frameworks. And this has to consider national circumstances. For the bank, we see that we have been already driving this agenda for more than 10 years now. We have set in 2016 a very important and ambitious target of allocating 40% of our annual investments as climate finance. And progress has been made from a mere 9% in 2016 to 41% in 2021 and 45% last year. We have also prioritized adaptation in our climate action agenda. We know that there is a global goal of ensuring parity between adaptation finance and mitigation finance, which has been set globally under the Paris Agreement. To date, we are proud to report that we are among the first institutions to achieve that parity goal in 2018. Since then, we have even surpassed this target. Last year, we have allocated 67% of our climate finance resources as adaptation. So this makes us a lead institution on adaptation globally and also across Africa. We are championing several climate change and green growth initiatives in the continent, including the 25 billion Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program that we are currently implementing together with the Global Center on Adaptation, which is also here. We do have an important program called Desert to Power, which is a 20 billion investment program to create the largest solar zone in the world, in the Sahel, to harness the potential, the solar potential of this region. We do have a 6.5 billion support to the continent-wide Great Green Wall Initiative, which is being currently implemented. We do have several programs like the Africa Disaster Risk Financing Initiative, which is also currently being implemented. So for us, we continue to drive this agenda, building on what we have been doing so far. We have also supported several countries to have their own green growth strategies. Countries like Zambia, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, etc., have benefited from such support in the past. And on adaptation in particular, yesterday there was a session, a high-level session to launch the country adaptation investment compacts, which is a new initiative that the Global Center on Adaptation and African Development Bank are conceptualizing in order to help African countries develop, have more access to adaptation finance. 7 countries have already developed their adaptation investment compacts, and there is a commitment to double that number by COP 2028 in November. So this is something that we need also to continue to follow up on. Finally, I think we believe that to drive green growth and climate action solution in Africa, the role of African parliamentarians is key. And we have been engaging already with African parliamentarians over the recent years in order to identify the key entry points to strengthen the roles in terms of parliamentarian actions to drive this agenda. And let me end here by stressing that as we shape Africa's climate change and green growth priorities at this Africa Climate Summit, we need to ensure that no one is left behind, and African parliamentarians need to have still a much more critical role than in the past to help translate the climate change and green growth commitments being made here and elsewhere into actions on the ground. With this, I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Whenever you come for these meetings, you will hear of $billion, trillions for commitments. Now, can we hear from the bank, the United Bank of Africa, Kenya, Dr. Chike? You are the CEO. Do you have money there for these things? We don't seem to have him here. Can we hear from Azim Lakani, who is a diplomatic representative of the Aga Khan Development Network, Kenya?
Thank you. Honorable members present, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. No single organization or sector has all the resources required to address the enormity of the issue we are dealing with today, climate change. Governments, the commercial sector, and civil society all have a part to play. This session is about action and resources, and I'm going to try and explain how one organization has addressed these issues. You, as parliamentarians, have a significant role. Alongside being involved in the legislative framework, you also represent your constituencies, the communities that elected you, who now have to deal with the enormous climate-related challenges. What I seek to do through this presentation is to describe how a non-governmental organization and the Ismaili community have undertaken action and committed significant resources towards this. His Highness the Aga Khan, the founder and chairman of the Aga Khan Development Network, is also the spiritual leader of the Shia Ismaili Muslims, and his mandate includes improving the material quality of life of the Ismailis and the people amongst whom they live. The ethics and values of Islam, which underpin the ethical framework of AKDN, include the notion of stewardship of the planet, that is, making it incumbent upon us to ensure that we leave the world in a better state than we inherited. In line with this responsibility, climate challenge adaptation are a core strategic priority and cross-cutting theme of AKDN. We have been active in Kenya for over 100 years, and we serve without regard to gender, race, ethnicity, or religion. Our 11 agencies and around 175 initiatives have become strong forces for social and economic development. A global AKDN Environment and Climate Committee, chaired by His Highness's son, Prince Rahim Aga Khan, established a policy, strategies, and best practices for AKDN. It has now instituted a commitment that all AKDN operations across all its agencies and institutions in over 30 countries where we operate globally will have net zero carbon emissions by 2030. Regarding Kenya, I would like to share a few examples of how we are addressing this. Across our various initiatives, we are developing and implementing activity-specific tools to measure greenhouse gas emissions and working on roadmaps to reducing them. AKDN was committed in its support towards the government of Kenya's goal of 10% tree cover by 2022, and we support its new goals. Our agencies have collectively planted over 12 million trees since 2014, with plans for a further 11 million by 2030. We continue to use scientific criteria to establish seedling nurseries, selecting appropriate trees, as well as protecting and nurturing seedlings to ensure survival up to sustaining levels. Our business and program models are also being transformed in line with our commitment. Nation Media Group, for example, has moved to a digital model to reduce its dependence on pulp and paper. Nation Media Group has further mobilized leadership from across Africa through its leadership forums and its Pan-Africa Kusi Ideas Festival, which focused on climate in its first festival. Our 13 Aga Khan schools are advancing the play, pluralism, and planet concept to ensure that the next generation of leaders is climate aware, climate empathetic, and climate resilient. The Aga Khan Foundation is growing over 500 acres of mangroves along the Swahili coast to enable carbon sequestration and encourage new forms of community-based development. The foundation is also working with rural communities to strengthen climate resilience by raising awareness about climate change and coping strategies. Over the next 3 years, it will work with 125,000 smallholder farmers in Kenya to advance nature-based approaches to agriculture. A new university center in Nairobi, an eco-friendly urban campus, is a shining example of the Aga Khan University's holistic approach to sustainability. In 2022, the center received EDGE Advanced certification for its multiple sustainability features. Our property development agency is striving to have all of our existing buildings and future property developments green certified as EDGE Zero Carbon. Healthcare presents a particular challenge as many processes and materials are unavoidably carbon intensive. However, our 3 hospitals and some 80 clinics are seeking creative solutions towards providing carbon neutral healthcare through responsible and sustainable material use, the optimization of pathways, and innovative waste management, anesthesia administration, and inhaler prescription. In our industrial operations, by introducing solar panels in a manufacturing plant by one of our agencies, we substituted nearly a quarter of the plant's energy demand. Our agency also supports tens of thousands of farmers in Kenya through the provision of knowledge and resources for climate-friendly best practices in agriculture. In partnership with the Nature Conservancy, over 9,000 farmers have benefited from the provision of around 12,000 water pans to promote water harvesting and storage. There is also a commitment to zero waste to landfill and reduction in water consumption by 2025. Our tourism promotion services are pioneering and promoting ecotourism practices across all 8 Serena hotels and lodges. The chain runs 3 of its properties on fully powered off-grid solar systems and another 2 properties on a grid-tied hybrid solar system. 6 of the 7 properties in Kenya have retained their gold eco-rating certification and have actually surpassed their annual targets for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The Diamond Trust Bank has embraced the use of energy-efficient appliances in all its 70 premises and conducts energy audits every week. The Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, under a memorandum of understanding with the UN Habitat in 2019, is working on sustainable urbanization initiatives involving rural and habitat planning. We also house a fine arts exhibition of Prince Hussein Aga Khan's marine photography, which raises awareness of the urgency and necessity to protect fragile ocean systems from the impact of climate change. These are some of the many relevant initiatives in Kenya. I could cite many more. Elsewhere in Africa, we work in 13 other countries and have similar climate-related initiatives. For example, the Al-Azhar Park in Cairo, which is now known as the Green Lung in a very densely dense city, and the Rusizi Renewable Hydropower Plant in Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda, which provides power for 30 million people and saves on reliance on wood fuel and charcoal. These are some of the many examples of our work. Our work in each country that AKDN operates in has benefited from international experiences and best practices. So I have sought to demonstrate how a civil society organization and the communities it works with, inspired by a strong ethical framework, can move beyond rhetoric to take substantial action over decades, commit resources way into the future, and be an active partner in addressing an issue that concerns all of us collectively. As parliamentarians, you may want to draw on our experiences and take up opportunities to harness civil society motivation, strengths, and resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aga Khan. Next, we want to hear from Martha, who is a partner at Adenia, Kenya. Can we continue with that conversation, Martha?
Thank you, Chair. Honorable members and distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be here today and to speak to you. My name is Martha Osea. I lead the Kenya office of Adenia Partners, which is a private equity investment firm that has been investing in Africa for the past 20 years. Some of our investors include the very active development finance institutions in East Africa, the likes of the IFC, the likes of DEG, the likes of Propaco, the likes of FMO. Those are some of our partners who have supported us in various funds. And now as we raise our Fund 5, we have also been successful in recruiting some of the local pension funds in Kenya. Adenia invests in private companies. In Kenya, I can mention a few of the companies that we have invested to date. These include Quickmart, which is now the second largest retailer, supermarket retailer by number of stores. We've also invested in Redlands Roses, which is a leading exporter of premium roses that's based in Ruiru. And lastly, we've invested in a laboratory equipment distributor, present in Kenya as well as in Uganda and Tanzania called Africa Biosystems. As a firm, we invest in a variety of sectors, and yes, in line with the theme of this conference, we have noted a number of the climate issues that our private companies, entrepreneurs, which are mostly family-led businesses, have been facing. As a result of that, in 2022, we made certain commitments to climate action, and I will go through those. For all of our investee companies, we aim to use commercially reasonable efforts to be carbon neutral by 2027 by way of avoidance, reduction, and/or offsetting our GHG emissions. All new investee companies will use commercially reasonable efforts to reduce over the life of the investment the intensity of their carbon footprint. A reduction target is set by Adenia and the investee companies within 15 months of investment, and this is something we monitor throughout the life of our investment. Since 2020, we have started accounting and reporting the carbon footprint of Adenia partners in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Corporate Standard, covering Scope 1, 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Each year provides us an opportunity to improve on the application of the GHG accounting and reporting principles, and the process for 2022, we have continued to reinforce this process. I'll just cover briefly the scope of the emissions that we target. So Scope 1, this includes direct emissions from owned or controlled sources. Fuel combustion from company vehicles would be an example. Scope 2 covers indirect emissions from the generation of purchased electricity, steam, heating, and cooling consumed by the companies. And Scope 3 includes all other indirect emissions that occur in an investment company and its portfolio activities along the value chain. This includes purchased goods, business travel, employee commuting, waste disposal, and capital goods. The majority of our investee companies have emissions that are in Scope 3, which represent 98% of the total footprint, while Scope 1 and 2 represent the remaining emissions. In terms of a deep dive, I'll give an example of one investment we have made in Kenya, which we can call a climate smart investment. The name of the company is Redlands Roses. It's located in Ruiru, so just about 30 kilometers from where we are, very close to Tatu City. This is a flower farm that was founded by a female entrepreneur, and it was one of the first flower farms in Kenya to be 100% hydroponic. So what does that mean? They do not plant their roses in the ground. Given that the area, I think most of the Kenyans who are here, you are familiar that Ruiru is a fast-growing area, and it's not nowadays to find this kind of agricultural activities in such a densely populated area. But Redlands, seeing the constraints that it faced, ensured that from day one, the farm was fully hydroponic. So the flowers are not planted in the ground, they are planted on raised beds, and this ensures that we are not impacting the groundwater that also supplies the growing community. As a result of that, we are now able to recycle the water. Redlands has been doing this for the past 20 years. So fully recycle the water again, and they have also set up reservoirs where they can harvest rainwater, again to limit the impact on the community. Other initiatives that Redlands has put in place and why we sought to invest in this company. Today, the company is expanding their growing area by 60%. This is our second year of investment, and we are quite happy that the expansion is almost done. Today, the company uses 20% of its power supply comes from solar, and with the expansion of the land area by 60%, this is also going to go up significantly. Lastly, because this is a profitable enterprise, both having a positive impact on the environment, we've been able to be certified as carbon neutral. And this is surprising for the flower sector, because we often get criticism that the fact that these flowers are exported by plane to Europe means that they are causing a lot of emissions. But actually, when you compare a grower such as Redlands, which is growing in a country like Kenya, where we can say we have favorable weather all year round, within greenhouses, and where we are able to fully recycle our water, we don't heat our plants as they do in Europe. This fully offsets the impact that a company like ours can have, given that it exports its roses using cargo. Lastly, Redlands has been able to be one of the strongest companies that supports women in the community. As you will know, in Kenya, and I think in a number of the other East African countries, a lot of the workers who are very diligent in growing the flowers are women. At Redlands, we are proud that we are able to support women in terms of being able to educate at least 2 of their children up to Form 4 or 18 years of age. And this, we have found, has really helped us to retain very good talent within the company. The company also provides a daycare facility for the young children of many of these working mothers, so that they don't have to take too much time off work, and their young children can be taken care of. Lastly, in terms of reducing our other emissions, for any staff who have been with the company for more than a year, based on good performance, they are eligible to get a bicycle. And because a lot of the employees are coming from the surrounding community, this is able to facilitate them coming to work and reduce the need for the company to have many buses, which would ultimately be adding emissions in the surrounding area. So that is one example of a climate smart company, and I think as private sector, we are always happy to look at companies that are profitable, supporting the community, and using smart climate solutions in their business.
Thank you, Martha. And to all of you, since you are doing climate smart investments, we would be interested to know at the end how much money you earn from carbon credit every year. Next, we want to hear from the Regional Director for Africa at the Global Center on Adaptation, Mr. Charles Nemachena. And I think the Global Compact is putting a lot of effort to mobilize resources to invest and creating opportunities to address some of these challenges we are talking about. So, Charles, what exactly are you doing?
Thank you, Chair. Honorable members, distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm honored to be here this afternoon to talk about what we are doing from the Global Center on Adaptation to ensure that we help countries get adaptation finance and implement adaptation action at scale and speed. From the Global Center on Adaptation, what we have done in the run-up to this Africa Climate Summit is to work with a number of countries, 7 of them, to develop adaptation country compacts, or in layman's terms, adaptation investment plans. And what these are ambitious finance mobilization plans for adaptation, because when you look at the adaptation finance figures, you actually see that across the continent, at the moment, we're only receiving about $11 billion, and most of that is actually going to less than 10% of countries. And the rest of the vulnerable countries actually receiving less finance despite the impacts of climate change that they are facing. So with the adaptation investment compacts, what we are doing, they were launched yesterday at the high-level event that we have with the presidents for Senegal, Tanzania, Ethiopia, but we also had a compact for Kenya, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria, Mozambique, and Congo-Brazzaville. So after this summit, what we are going to do is to work with these countries, mobilize resources, have them capitalized before COP28, and to do that, we are going to have investment roundtables in the countries. We have already started seeing some of the commitments that are already coming from government and different partners to finance some of the priorities that have been identified. So the compacts, what they are doing is to identify the priorities, not another national document, not another publication, but we're looking at what is already in the NDCs and looking at adaptation opportunities and ensuring that those are prioritized and resources mobilized to actually implement those priorities so that we see action on the ground and help address vulnerabilities on the ground. And actually, to add to that, on Monday, we had an opportunity to visit Makueni, to visit Mukuru Informal Settlement here in Nairobi with former Secretary General Banimun. And what we found is that the communities in Mukuru have developed an adaptation plan, their plan, and what they need is resources. And the message from them for you, honorable members, is we have developed an adaptation plan of what we need to see on the ground. We hear there's an Africa Climate Summit here in Nairobi, but what we are hearing are billions being talked about, and we don't see those billions translating to action here on the ground. So I think it's your responsibilities as members to actually see that the development projects that you take to the ground mainstream adaptation and resilience, and the people on the ground actually see the impact of the billions, the millions that are being talked about, that are being mobilized as climate finance to actually help people on the ground. And also, one of the things that we have realized is government put a lot of resources in development projects, but it is actually very important that as members, as you do your national budgets, you actually ensure that adaptation and resilience should not be an afterthought, but should be part and parcel of the planning of the development projects that you are taking out there to ensure that more resources are taken on the ground so that the people out there, like in Kuru Informal Settlement, will not just be hearing about the billions, the millions that are being mobilized for climate finance, but they actually see it happening on the ground. Can we take those actions, the resources that are being mobilized, to ensure that we implement action on the ground and with speed and scale? So at the Global Center on Adaptation, we are partnering with the African Development Bank, implementing the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a 25 billion program over 5 years, as my colleague here has indicated. And what is important is actually that from the Global Center on Adaptation, we are providing technical assistance through the upstream financing facility to ensure that the investments that the bank and other international finance institutions are implementing have been strengthened in their design to ensure that adaptation and resilience is embedded in those projects, and we see more action on the ground. And from the experience that we have done in the past 28 months, we have influenced more than 6.7 billion worth of investments across 27 countries in the continent, and we are working to expand those operations to ensure that more action is actually seen on the ground. And we look forward to ensure that the compacts that we have developed with the countries that we have piloted, the 7 countries, we extend before COP28 to more countries, And we ensure that these are mobilized and capitalized, and we see more action on the ground, not to just produce another document or another publication, but we're going to be working with different partners across these countries to ensure that what we have developed through the Adaptation Investment Compacts is actually realized through tangible resources, through tangible action that is implemented on the ground. And it's actually an important role that members of parliament have to play to ensure that they also mobilize resources from the different actors, because at the moment, very little resources are actually coming through for adaptation from the private sector, from philanthropies, and I think it's a role for members of parliament to mobilize resources from these different sources to actually ensure that tangible projects are actually implemented on the ground, that there are people that voted for them who actually see adaptation action on the ground, because that's where the impacts are being felt. That's where the damages are actually happening. May we take action on the ground and scale it at speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And Dr. Mafo will come now after lunch. But at this point, I would like to open to some 3 burning questions. I start here.
Firstly, I'd like to appreciate this privilege to address this esteemed chamber. Honorable Chair, distinguished guests, good afternoon. It is with great humility that I introduce myself. My name is Diljot Dinsa, and I am a student specializing in accounting and finance at Strathmore University, which is situated here in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, we have discussed coming up with a range of resolution and policies aimed at fostering and channeling investment toward advancing sustainable green growth. How can we ensure that the benefits we are discussing today do not disproportionately favor the private sector, given the persistent challenges of corruption? Kindly expand more on measures that are or will be put in place to guarantee that the policies and incentives being enacted are distributed fairly among a diverse range of stakeholders, including marginalized communities and women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Can I get from, yeah.
Thank you, moderator and chair. My name is Samuel Masiwo. I come from Homabay County. I wanted to raise about 4 critical issues around green growth and sustainable production. In terms of research interventions that are defined in policy through a legislative framework to help curb instances of cancer that has increased as a result of pesticides and fungicides. And we realize this then affects both the farmer that is in constant contact with these chemicals, and eventually it ends with the consumer. 2, if by us coming together, there could be, as members of parliament, a legislative framework to ensure that the various climate players and actors, parliamentarians, the private sector, youth actors, and even the private sectors, if they could be brought together, because at the moment everybody seems to be doing something, but distinctively on their own. So could there be a policy through legislation that brings all this together so that there is one way to go through it? And 3, in Europe, for example, there is pollution, but their rivers are largely clean. I come from Lake Victoria. If you went there, in books it's the freshwater lake, but if you went in there, you would want to look at it casually and wonder if it's any fresher. So my question would be, what interventions are in place to help curb the pollution in the rivers and the water bodies that we have? And then 4, which is the final one, Chair, with your permission, could there be a water harvesting policy, like it is in Rwanda, where if, for example, you want a particular construction approved, then in it you must tell how you want to harvest the waters that would come thereof, as a way of helping to curb runoffs that eventually take all the debris into the water bodies and in turn affect population. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a question from West Africa? Southern Africa? Okay, proceed.
Thank you very much. Juma Zakaria, young parliamentarian from South Sudan. I will not going to make a statement. I will go directly to my question. The first question is, since we start this meeting, all the organizations that concerning the environment or climate change, honestly, we do have any organization in my country working in that area. As she was talking about before, that some of parliament, they don't have any knowledge, they don't have any anything to do with the climate change. But I will add that South Sudan is part of that parliament that she mentioned. But I think I'm the only MP start like in that area. Maybe last month I was in Germany for the same dialogue. My question here, how can we benefit from all this information and all the organization? How can we get all these services to my people in South Sudan? Because South Sudan, as I said last time, it is part of East Africa, it is part of Africa, and it's part of world. Thank you.
Very much. Any other question? Can I hear from Honorable, that Honorable Chemaswet?
Thank you so much, Chair. Chemaswet Kisos, Member of Parliament for Soy constituency in Uganda. I'm really grateful that we are here when Honorable Kajwang is the chair and the convener of the dialogue. And I'm also grateful that he's seated with my chairperson on the Committee on Climate Change in Parliament of Uganda. Are we really one, Mr. Chair? Are we united in terms of handling climate issues? Are we lamenters? The only person who is not lamenting is Azim from Aga Khan, because he seems to have implemented a lot in relation to climate change. What about the shared resources, internationally shared resources of our various countries? Are we using them well? Are we complaining a lot? Are we divided in this? Is Honorable Kajwang working together with the Chairman Songa, Lawrence, on issues to do with Lake Victoria? Are regional blocks helpful in terms of creating unity on climate? Are we together on Migingo? So that we don't need to divide ourselves, we need to work together. For this region as EAC, and other regions as well, West Africa and all the rest, I believe East African Federation will be more helpful in terms of helping us with climate change. If we are to talk of Lake Victoria, if we are to talk of Mount Elgon, and other natural resources, including Lake Turkana as well, these are issues that we should be united together in one front.
Yeah.
What about financing, Mr. Chair? Financing. Yesterday we heard of UAE putting money, promising to give 7.5 billion US dollars. USA, 30 million US dollars. What about the African states? Are they only lamenting and complaining alone? What have they put on the table in terms of combating climate change? Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are only not focusing on East Africa. We are also talking about the Niger Delta. We are talking about the Zambezi and all. This is Africa. I think he has put a number of questions. I want to close so that the presenters can, the speakers can give summaries, but maybe one more burning.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My name is Honorable Joseph Lilmingit, MP Kenya, from Kenya, and I sit as an executive member for climate change at the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association, an elected member. Now, I want to ask, there's a person who presented here, Ms. Mother Adenia, on smart climate farming solutions. Also, in our region, we still see that, including hydroponics, we still see that as a luxury and belongs only to the rich. How can we extend the same to the common mwananchi within the regions that we come from? Secondly, I want to ask my colleague from Uganda who just stood that we are here for you. The reason why AU met is because we need to share the kind of ideas that we have, and we provide solutions to the entire Africa region and the world. Finally, as a youthful member in leadership, how can we take this to the young, vibrant youth across the country so that they can own this initiative? We make these climate change initiatives more vibrant, more sexy, so that the youth can also get involved in this, so that they can propagate or expand these issues of solutions for the climate change. And there's a Swahili proverb that says, burn the fish while it's still wet. I believe if we use the strength of the youth that we have at the moment so that they can take this on a ship, they can actually help provide solutions to curb this climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, the youth representative. Can we hear from, in 1 minute each, from the speakers? Yes?
Yes, thank you. I am late in my next session, so let me, if you allow me, to start by addressing the first question from the lady, the student from Nairobi. I think from our side at the African Development Bank, we do have some rigorous procedures in spending our resources when we approve any project. So issues relating to fighting against corruption, ensuring that the project's benefits to the local communities, etc., are well considered in such processes. And our member countries also are well aware of those processes. So on that side, I think we are not worried because we strictly apply our policies on that. And the last point I wanted to touch was on financing. The gentleman was speaking about the need for domestic resource mobilization for climate action and green growth. I think this is a very important point. And already some African countries are making effort in allocating some part of their national budget to addressing climate crisis and also supporting their green growth agenda. But we know that it is not enough. We know that some have made commitment that 10% of their climate commitments will be supported through domestic resources, but the rest has to come from international financing. So it is a combination of both domestic resource mobilization and international financing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you. And also to add on resource mobilization, I think, as I indicated in my speak, it is very important for parliamentarians to ensure that the investments that we are already putting on the ground, the development projects, embed climate resilience and adaptation, mobilizing domestic resources, At the moment, I think about 26% is being channeled through government sources to adaptation, and that could be increased. And also, we also have an important role to mobilize other stakeholders, the private sector, international finance institutions, to ensure that more resources are put to adaptation, and the adaptation country compacts that we have developed and that we are developing with the other countries will be an important channel where countries can actually mobilize more resources for adaptation. And also to the honorable member from South Sudan, I think you as members of parliament, I think you also have an important role to understand the climate change issues, risks on the ground. And I think the work that we are doing, we work with different partners, government, civil society, IFIs, youth, technical partners from the national government and also global experts to ensure that we bring the knowledge, the science of climate change impacts and risks and embed them in the development and design of projects working with international finance institutions. So I think it's very important as we implement the sustainable development and adaptation agenda that we work together to advance action and scale on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Martha.
Thank you, Honorable Member, for the question regarding smart climate solutions. I think, yes, you're completely right. Historically, solutions such as hydroponics have been more for the large-scale farmers and is definitely something that is seen as a luxury by many of the younger farmers. However, we are starting to see today that there are many innovations in this space. So what I would suggest the young people interested in using hydroponics, there are ways that they can adopt it. You don't have to start with the Rolls-Royce system, but I think today with our new education system, CBC, there are elements that we can implement that are not as expensive. And obviously we would need to work with some of the financing partners to finance these as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martha. Ambassador, can we hear your final?
Yes, thank you. So the main point I was making was that there is a role for an organization that is outside the formal government sector, and it can make a huge difference. I described how we as an organization work within an ethical framework. We start by understanding needs. We then draw on best practices internationally to provide solutions, or even undertake developmental research to see what works through innovative practices. We draw resources from the Ismaili community, His Highness the Aga Khan, but also partner organizations that want to work with us and have mutual interests, and that all of this requires leadership which is provided by His Highness the Aga Khan.
Thank you very much. At this juncture, first of all, I want to say Honorable Kofi from West Africa, Ghana, you will ask your question in the next session. Please prepare it. And also I want to appeal to the Sergeant at Arms to mobilize the members who are outside there to come on the stairs for the group photo with the Right Honorable Speaker. Lunch is going to be for 45 minutes. Lunch is going to be for 45 minutes. Let us try to keep time so that we come back for the next session and wind up. Can we give a big clap for all of us? Thank you very much.
Honorable members, the Speaker of the National Assembly will join us for lunch, and I urge that before we do the lunch, we will do a group photo. We'll do a group photo. I think the Speaker of the National Assembly is coming down the stairs to join us, just outside, when we walk outside, and then we'll quickly proceed for lunch and come back for the main resolutions and declarations out of this meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.